Hello, everyone. This is JD Calderon, and this is Indy Comics Explained. Today, I'm talking to Sidney Williams, the awesome writer from Silverline Studios. So, Sidney, please let everybody know who you are, what you're about, and why you're here today.
Well, thanks for having me tonight. I am Sidney Williams, and I am a writer. When people hear that you do any work with comics, they say, "Oh, do you draw?" And no, I can't draw, but I write, and I have written comics for Silverline in various facets of Silverline's existence. For a number of years now, and have a couple of projects that are just ready to get out of the gate very soon, and then working on some new projects for Silverline as well. And I'm a novelist and short story writer in addition to that. So anyway, that's who I am.
All right, cool. So now, so you're a writer. You've been doing it for a while. Now, what was the genesis? What got you started in writing? What were the things that pushed you, when you were a child, to become a writer? Like, what are the things you saw and what really invigorated that imagination in you?
I think there were various factors that kind of blended. Um, when I was little, my grandmother was my babysitter. She lived in our lived with my family and everything. That was my mother's mother, and she read my to me. Babysitter. She lived.
Sorry about that. That was me.
Up there. She was my babysitter. She read to me a lot, and so I always had stories. I was always exposed to stories, and my dad read to me a lot. And I was telling the Silverline guys just recently. My dad, one of the first things he read to me, mainly because they published Tarzan, but we had a lot of Gold Key comics when I was a kid, and so we had Tarzan comics, and we had Ripley's Believe It or Not, which was essentially a horror comic in those days, and Space Family Robinson, or Lost. It was Lost in Space, the Space Family Robinson. So all kind of things of imagination, and all of that kind of went into my head. My dad read me Edgar Allan Poe as well, and terrified me one time when I was very little with a reading of The Raven, or just a few passages from it. And I had coloring books, and as I began to go to kindergarten and learn to make letters, I was kind of inspired to tell my own story, and I would rewrite the captions on the coloring book, kind of telling my own story with my mom spelling words. I could make letters, but I couldn't spell words. So that's what really started it all. And as I got older, I realized I wanted to continue to tell stories in some way. And really, I guess kind of seriously, late junior high into high school, really started writing stories and reading as a writer, I guess, reading mystery stories, reading Stephen King and some of those things, and realizing this is what I want to do, and sort of taught myself, put the building blocks in place, and began to write, and eventually to happily sell some things.
Cool. Now you're talking about selling things. Now that's you selling to editors, or you selling directly to the public?
Me selling to editors mostly. I have self-published, I think, one short story in my life. But otherwise, I have managed to find people that wanted to publish my work. I back in the way back in the 80s, back in those distant years of the 80s. I When I got out of college, I knew I wanted to write, but I knew I needed to make a living. So I got a job as a newspaper reporter. And that was pretty brutal work. I worked the crime beat part of the time, and realized, I didn't want to do that forever. But the great thing about it was it exposed me to the world. I was always going places, meeting people, and seeing things. And it also, I had a schedule that was actually really great for me. the first several years that I worked after college. My shift was 1 p.m. to 10 p.m., which was
Yeah, okay.
kind of, would slide because when you're a reporter, you work when something's happening.
Right.
So I'd get off, a little after 10 most nights. I would go home, I would eat something, I would rest a while because I realized I couldn't write right after I had worked a shift as a newspaper reporter, sometimes going out to crime scenes and talking to cops and just all of the things that are related to that. So I would rest a while, and about midnight I would start writing because I also realized if I don't force myself to do this, it's not going to happen. And so about midnight, which is a great time if you're writing darker fiction, about midnight I would start writing. I would write till 2 in the morning, and then I would crash till about 10. Get up, have a little something to eat. I was fresh then, so I would edit what I wrote the night before, and I had a good bit of time before I had to be at work. So I actually, had a brutal schedule, and yet it had kind of this time built into it for me to write, which was wonderful. And I had written some novels in college, like the trunk novels, as people will call them. I was going to be a private eye writer. And I wrote three novel-length manuscripts, trunk novels, whatever you would call them. Learned to finish a long manuscript. And I wrote those, and I realized at that point that I didn't really have anything new to bring to the private eye story. I'm going, these are just kind of like other private eye stories. I kind of like my guy, but he's not, he's not anything that different. And so I started thinking, well, I had liked Lovecraft in high school. I had liked Stephen King. I thought, what if I wed the mystery story and the horror story a bit, since those were kind of areas of my interest. And I wound up writing, and I had a dream, a dream that I got this phone call in the middle of the night, and it was somebody telling me, I'm going to kill a priest. I thought, wow, what a great first line. And I said, why are you telling me this? Still in the dream. And I go, after the priest, you're next. Wow, what a great opening. And all of those things kind of dovetailed, and that became the first line for a novel called Azarias, and that became my first published novel. I looked around, found an agent found an agent who liked the book, sent it around. And
hold on a second. I'm sorry. But the process of finding an agent, just so people can understand the difficulty, because I've heard these stories before. So I mean, what process did you have to go through to get an agent?
And that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, I guess. Right. But I got Writer's Market and Writer's Digest, and I looked for agents that were accepting material, and I wrote query letters and sent out. I don't remember how many I sent out, but a company called Pima Brown Limited and Perry Brown of Pima Brown Limited contacted me and answered my query, and he said, send us your manuscript or whatever. And so they looked at it, they liked it, and they sent it to Fawcett Books, and Fawcett doing quite a bit of paperback horror in those days, and it sat forever at Fawcett. And I forget where else, but I was going out to the bookstore and going, what is Fawcett Publishing? Do they publish anything like mine? And everybody that writes knows, there's these long stretches. But it took forever, and they finally turned it down, and they sent it some other places, and then they Perry and Pima Brown Limited said, well, what else you got? It's seeming like this is not going to fly. And I had been working on another manuscript there, but it was a little more mystery coming of age. And they go, yeah, this is kind of hard to sell. I go, well, let me look around myself a while. And around that time, I noticed that Pinnacle Books had been around and they had disappeared. I didn't know all the story then. but I started to notice there were some Pinnacle books turning up, and in fact, there was one called Ghouls by Edward Lee, and horror fans will know Edward Lee's name. Ghouls by Edward Lee, and around that time, I read an article in a collection of essays about Stephen King that he had submitted. I think it was probably the book Rage that he submitted and almost sold, or getting getting it owned. It's the one that's been withdrawn from publication. But he wrote a query letter to the editor of the Parallax View, and sent that out, and they go, let us look at your manuscript, and it almost sold. And go, well, that's interesting. So I wrote a letter on the envelope to the editor of Ghouls, blah blah, and the letter was, "Hi, Sidney Williams, I have a book. It's a blah blah blah." Short while later, I get a letter back, and it's my letter. We get an envelope back. It's my letter. It just has a note that says, "Please send complete manuscript."
Yeah.
So I sent it in, and I must have put my desk number at the newspaper on it as well as my home number. And this was, nobody knew what a cell phone was in those days. And so one day I was sitting at my desk, and I actually was this guy kept calling me, but he was wanting to be a paranormal investigator, and he kept calling me, and had been a murder case, and he thought it might involve like a demonic possession or something. And so he was, knew I was a reporter. And so, I think he called like somebody related to it. He kept calling me, well, yeah, there's no story about you wanting to be a public. This guy keeps calling. In the midst of that, I get a call, and it's Anne Lafargue, who was later my editor. And she goes, "Hi, this is Anne Lafargue from Pinnacle Books, and I've read your book, and we want to buy it." And we talked a few minutes. It's not quite real. And you put the phone down. The paranormal investigator calls back. Yeah, whatever. And finally, it sank in that I had sold something, and so wound up writing 8 books in all for Kensington. Kensington bought Pinnacle, the original Pinnacle, and.
Now, let me ask you: is that one series, or
no,
is it like separate books?
It's 5 standalone books that I wrote for Kensington, and 3 young adult novels under the name Michael August. And so that was that first book was beginning of happily some multiple contracts where I had a couple of books due over a period of time and everything, and it was a great experience. And I had been thinking about going back to school and pursuing an MFA, and I kind of said, I'm gonna either sell something or I'm gonna pursue an MFA, and I sold something. So I wrote, and that started all kind of things happening. And there are fits and starts in a writing life, and mine has had plenty of those. But one thing often leads to another, and many years later, I'm still doing something in this field.
So we got a question from Aaron. He's asking, what city did you do your newspaper reporting in?
I was in central Louisiana, and it was Alexandria, Louisiana, and the name of the paper, it was 100 years old when I worked at it. It was the Alexandria Daily Town Talk. So very old school name. Had great Times New Roman, not Times New Roman, Old English font was the masthead. And eventually they redesigned it when we got color. It was a black and white newspaper when I started, and color, transitioning to color presses and all was a big thing. But they were Irish. It was a family-owned newspaper when I worked for it, and they had been Huey's. Now it was a gentleman named J.D. Smith was the publisher by the point that I was, the family had married and remarried, and Huey had married a Smith and all that. But they had a green line at the bottom, and there were little boxes at the bottom with featured news items or something, but there was a green line that recalled the Irish family that founded the paper and everything.
Mm.
And it was a 40,000 roughly circulation daily. Central Louisiana, served the kind of the whole center of Louisiana, and we had a Baton Rouge bureau and all. So Alexandria Daily Town Talk sounds like, oh, you work for like a goofy newspaper. It was actually a pretty well respected paper for in the state, and one of like 5 or 6 major newspapers in Louisiana, and lots of fun.
That's cool. Now, from obviously novels, you've transitioned into comic books. Now, how did that occur, and what was the process of that happening?
It was a matter. It started with, and I teach as well, and I often tell my students, opportunity. It's an old saying. It's not original with me, but I repeat often to my students, opportunity comes to those on the dance floor, and I had written several novels or a couple of novels, and started looking around for conventions to go to promote the books and get the word out and everything. Met some great people back during that time, but I would go to conventions, get on panels as much as I could, and talk about my books. And there was a convention. Well, there's an ongoing convention in Biloxi, Gulfport, Mississippi, called CoastCon, and there's also a great little Gulf Coast fan network. And so there was New Orleans Science Fiction and Fantasy Festival in those days in New Orleans, and a lot of the people that put all the blood, sweat, and tears into putting that on were also friends with people that did the CoastCon thing, and everybody, there's a great little network of people, Southern fandom, the best of Southern fandom. Sadly, a lot of the folks have passed away. A guy named Robert Nagel was, one of the, kingpins of Southern fandom there. A guy named Joey Griot, who was just a brilliant guy. Met them going to cons, met some other people, and had gotten to be friends with a guy named Robert Pettit, who was from Texas and had gotten to be a pretty good friend of Joe Lansdale's. And so CoastCon 13 occurred, and they wanted to have a horror theme, and they knew me, and I knew Robert, and Robert knew Joe. I knew Joe, but Robert really good buddies with Joe, and got Joe Lansdale to be a guest of honor at CoastCon 13. And so, we did panels, and I first of all, I saw some guys that had a table set up, and a couple of guys were drawing comics, and another guy was talking, so I saw, okay, some guys, some comic book guys here, and wound up being on a panel with them, and it was Roland Mann, Stephen Butler, and Mitch Bird, who were Silverline in those days. And I got to talking to Roland, and I just kind of did some panels together and kind of hit it off. And probably he called me up and he said, have you ever thought about writing comics? Well, I had loved comics as a kid too. I had, loved books, pulp, Doc Savage, The Shadow, Tarzan, all of the usual, works of imagination. And he said, well, have you ever thought about writing comics? And I had read some articles, so I knew the principles of comic writing. And he said, well, have you ever thought about doing it? And I go, I'd love to. I just, figured out how to break into books. I don't know who you call about comics. And he goes, we're kind of packaging stuff. And what we like to do is find an artist, find a writer, put the team together, and, see what happens. And so he said, have you got any ideas? And I think probably the conversation started at CoastCon and probably continued over to NASF, the New Orleans Science Fiction and Fantasy Festival. And so wound up coming up with the idea of this guy investigating a disappearance in New Orleans, and he became a character named Peter Mantis. And he was actually a guy whose father was a sorcerer or whatever, or wanted to be a sorcerer. His father had tried to sacrifice him as a child. He survived. And actually, the guy that rescued him was the guy who had disappeared. And he's trying to find him. And that was the story. And the artist was a guy named Thomas Giles who lived in New Orleans. And so it was perfect. He could go out and, sit in front of St. Louis Cathedral and sketch, that as the backdrop. And, if I said go to St. Louis Cemetery number 2, the famous above ground cemetery and all that, he was there. And I was in central Louisiana. And so the Mantis Files became my first miniseries. And I wound up writing a number of other things for Roland and Silverline when Silverline was a packager. And I wrote a voodoo New Orleans story. Basically, a guy is cursed and trying to stop himself from turning into a zombie. So a little bit different zombie story. That became Sirens, which was published by Caliber. And so it worked for Malibu. Mantis was published by Malibu and Caliber, different presses in those days. And went on, had some comic experience. So I wrote a graphic novel. That's a few years ago now, but a graphic novel called The Dusk Society for a company called Campfire Comics, and that was loads of fun. And it's still available, still out there. And
where is it available?
Amazon. Should be on Amazon.
Okay, cool.
And it is Amazon. The USA Dusk Society. About a team of misfits who get pressed into service to battle evil and the paranormal and the unusual things.
Cool.
And, and now Silverline, which is an upstart independent publisher that spans multiple genres. I think that's what that's the the verbiage for it. Silverline is back and doing things, and so I have a couple of projects now on in the staging area for them. One called Friar Rush, and a one shot called Friar Rush will be a miniseries, and Bloodline will be a one shot. And Bloodline is based on a short story that Robert Pettit and I wrote together that I mentioned. It appeared in an anthology called Under the Fang, edited by Robert McCammon. Horror fans will know his name. He created a shared world of a world ruled by vampires. And so Bloodline is the story of a group of human resistance fighters battling vampire overlords and transporting blood slaves by an underground railroad who our heroes are trying to derail, if you will. And Friar Rush is the tale of a 14th century demonic figure who took on the guise of a friar in his day to tempt and destroy men of the cloth, men and women of the cloth. And that's an actual German legend. It was a story told in verse in those days. But Friar Rush infiltrated a monastery and pretended to be the cook for a while and corrupted the whole monastery and everything. Well, in our story, he shows up in the modern world and wants to wreak havoc. He's sort of a trickster figure. The original Friar Rush, the legendary Friar Rush, really was, and he is up to the same antics in contemporary New Orleans. So those are my projects. And Silverline has a project going right now as well, a Kickstarter that involves several creators. They're calling it a double header, and it is Divinity and Twilight Grim. So if people want to search for Silverline double feature, Divinity and Twilight Grim, that you should find it on Kickstarter, and it is going strong, and there is tons of original art. If anybody's a collector of original pages or original artworks, or the artists that worked on the comics are contributors, and there are also just other artists that are friends of the creators that have contributed pieces or will draw custom art. for
Nice.
supporters that get the that choose the package with that reward.
Right.
So lots of cool stuff happening. And with that, Divinity is about a young lady who develops the ability to heal by touch, and
Mhm.
then realizes everybody's going to want that.
Mhm.
She and her ex-Marine brother have to flee all of these people that want to control her. So great story there. And then the other story, Twilight Grim, is set in a world where it's not unlike Bloodline, interestingly, but it is a world where there has been a wall built, and there's like a shut off area of the poor, and vampires kind of have free reign there. And it's kind of understood that if they leave the rest of the world alone, they can prey on the poor and the downtrodden there. But a figure named Twilight Grim arrives to take on the vampires and say, "No, we're not having that."
Gotcha.
So some great projects and great
Mhm.
art. Also Silverline.
So now, Kickstarter, is this their first Kickstarter they've done so far?
No, they did done a couple of really successful ones. Roland Mann, who many comics fans will know, Roland went to California, moved to California, or went to Cali back in the day to work for Malibu, and was an editor there for many years. And then Malibu sold to Marvel, and so as he puts it, Spider-Man was on his paycheck for a number of years until they, basically just absorbed Malibu. And, he became a teacher then and started doing some different things. But back in the day, he wrote a couple of comics, but he wrote Cat and Mouse, a superhero team comic, and he wrote about a character named Demon, who was a scientist who morphed into sort of he looked like a demon, but into a beast-like character with a three-pronged tail. So if you ever find a demon comic, you will notice his tail, because that was one of the most fun things about Demon. Well, Roland brought back Cat and Mouse in a new incarnation, or he has brought them back. And so he did a Kickstarter to launch that, and that was really successful. And then there's also a comic that they recently did a Kickstarter for called Kalis, about and it's a very interesting story. It's about a guy who went into space on a secret CIA space mission. And you don't know exactly what happened to him, but he went into space, and then one day he comes flaming back into Earth's atmosphere. Returns, survives, and it has to figure out what is going on. So they kick-started the Kalis kickoff as well. So, and there probably maybe have been a couple of others, but Divinity and Twilight Grim are the latest in a line of Silverline Kickstarters.
Now, Bloodline, your book. So it's a one-shot currently?
It is, as with anything, you write it in such a way that it could go on. But it is a contained story, and it's based on a short story. If I can reach for it without leaving the camera too far. Yeah. Have a couple of this is the pocketbook collection of stories that included our story, Does the Bloodline Run on Time? And it was also done in limited edition by where do I need to go there? It's always backwards. Limited edition, nice boxed edition.
Nice.
From Borderlands Press. And so anyway, it was a single short story, kind of about this guy named Dugan, who is a resistance fighter, or he wants to be a resistance fighter. But we learned, and Dugan is a rugged guy, biker, and everything. But in a world ruled by vampires where survival is important, he had compromised himself, and he was actually a procurer of vampires. And so he is has changed his ways and is working with the resistance team to redeem himself. And of course, the resistance team is very skeptical and questioning of him because, of course, he has a very grim background, essentially a pimp for vampires, and delivering victims to vampires does not lead to anything good. So very dark background, and so he is out to right the wrongs he did or save more people, since he is responsible for deaths and everything. And one contained story with an arc for Dugan, but certainly the team and everything could go on if the outcry was there for it or whatever.
That's always a hope. I mean, that's where we want to see it go. We want to continue. Want to see it continue. Want to see it live. Build on it. And
it would be loads of fun to have an ongoing Bloodline series and Dugan further adventures for Dugan.
Right. So, what, like, the genesis of this story? I mean, I know you worked with another individual to bring it all together. Like, what were your inspirations when you were bringing this world together? Like, what did you do to visualize it?
It had liked, of course, somewhere in my life I got exposed. Well, actually, it was my dad again. My dad had liked Dracula as a kid too. My dad was old enough that he had seen the Bela Lugosi Dracula when it came out in the theater and been terrorized. He was a little kid, but I was terrorized. So he introduced me to Dracula and things like that when I was a kid too. And this vampire story came along. What happened was that Robert Pettit and I were both active members of the Horror Writers Association. It was Horror Writers of America in those days. It's Horror Writers Association now. But we were both members, and a snail mail package came saying, "Hi, open call to members. Robert McCammon is going to edit this, and here are the guidelines. This is a world ruled by vampires." And he had 2 or 3 scenarios, and one of them was there were reports of an underground train that transports victims for the vampires. And railroads were interesting to me as well, and always have been. And so I jotted down some notes, and all in those days, everything was by mail. And Robert Pettit lived in Baton Rouge, and so I wrote him. I said, we ought to do this together, because we'd gotten to be pretty good buddies just by correspondence and seeing each other, at conventions and things. And I said, we ought to work on this together. And he goes, yeah, we'll do that. And so I wrote a draft and kind of invented Dugan and latched on to that notion of the train. And I think, trying to remember, probably we had to write an outline and submit that to Robert McCammon. And so hashed that out between us, sent that in. Robert McCammon actually called me up and said, "I'd really love to see this story if you guys write it." So we did, and I wrote a draft, sent it to Robert. Robert wrote a draft, sent it back to me, and we hammered it out. Robert, as I had mentioned, is from Texas, and he noted that one of the people that battled Dracula was from Texas, and so he goes, "I think Dugan ought to be from Texas." So Dugan became a Texan. And we have a Cajun. I'm from Louisiana, so we have a Cajun guy in the mix as well, and a female resistance. Kind of the lead of the resistance band is Quicksand. Her code name is Quicksand. So a little group, and all that took shape just by us mailing manuscripts back and forth. We had different kinds of computers. We're printing these things out and making notes, and we finally hammered it out. And when we do, there will be a Kickstarter for Bloodline, and when we do that, uh, one of the rewards will be a newly revised version of the original short story. You'll be able to get a PDF in one of the rewards packages. And I say newly revised because writers always like to rewrite, and I'm a better writer now than I was, when I was a kid. And so I have repolished and tweaked and, added a few little character nuances. So it will be a new iteration of the story that actually draws some inspiration back from the comic version. So that's, all things kind of circle and are interdependent and all that.
So now in your writing process, right? I know for myself, it's funny because I was, when one of the first things you said that I found really interesting was that you would write the night before and then edit the following morning, right? Because it's funny because I write my entire, whatever it is I'm writing, I write it to the end, and then I put it to the side for 6 months, right? And then that's when I pull it out, and I'm like, okay, I don't even know what this is anymore, and I just beat on it. So. Yeah, I mean, how did you come up with your process? Because I was just really curious about that.
Yeah, it's various things. And I was going to say, I think that's great. And I do that now, too. I think it's great for it to grow. Joseph Fender, I was having a conversation with Joseph Fender on Twitter one time. And I asked him, what is your process? And he said, well, I write it and then I let it grow cold so that I can read it with fresh eyes. And so that I kind of adopted that word. I like to let a manuscript go cold these days so that, you can read, and you can read what you know what you meant, but you also know what it's saying. And so you can fix things like that. But my process really is, an amalgamation of trial and error and also reading a lot of articles. I discovered in so many things, as I mean, go into your creative development. I got a book at school called 1001 Free Things. And I knew, and this was when I was maybe in high school, maybe
I know that book.
Late junior high. Well, one of the things in there was you could get a free sample copy of Writer's Digest. And, I go, and it didn't know it existed. And so I thought, well, I ought to get a magazine called Writer's Digest if I want to write. And so I wrote, and I got a sample copy. It was like January of whatever year. It had an interview with John Jakes, who it must have been about 76, which I'm going to date myself here. I'm 100 years old.
So am I.
I'm a vampire. No. They had an interview with John Jakes about writing what was then called the American Bicentennial series. It became the Kent Family Chronicles. And made a couple of them into miniseries and things like that. And then he went on to write North and South because that had kind of gotten him into writing big historical novels. But subscribe to Writer's Digest. There was an ongoing column, I think it was bi-monthly in those days, by the mystery writer Lawrence Block. And I would read that. And there were different things that just kind of seeped in. Like he wrote a column one time that was essentially Write It Anyway. And that's probably contained in his book, Writing the Novel from Plot to Print, which is still, you can at least still get an ebook of that. But it was Write It Anyway, and, tired, doesn't matter, you need to write. Bad day, doesn't matter. And he kind of said to the effect of, can you write 1 page a day on a bad day, on a terrible day? And I took that to heart. And, on my worst day as a reporter, when I was just worn out and everything, I would keep that in mind. And if I had to produce, and so I would at least try to write a page. And that let me, again, you write a page a day, a couple hundred days, you've got something. And that it was a little bits of information like that from journals and things.
Mhm.
And I would write, as I said, I would write late at night, and I would play a lot of things. I would play Tangerine Dream's Tiger a lot in those days. Tyger. It
Mhm.
incorporates their music and that digital, sound, and the poems of William Blake. So you have Tiger and London and different
Mhm.
things. It was very dark,
Right.
moody music, and that was always playing in the background. And I would hunch over a variety of happily progressively better computers. Uh,
Mhm.
And it's very first thing I ever worked on was a Smith Corona electric typewriter. Well, the first thing I ever worked on, my family had a manual, which was,
Mhm. Right.
and but I wrote some of the first things I ever wrote. I wrote on a manual typewriter, and that was pounded the keys,
Yeah.
and just developed the tenacity that I was not going to let the harshness of my job
Mhm.
stop me, and not going to give up, and.
Right.
And I've held true to that. And I worked in marketing for a number of years, and I didn't produce as much during that time. And I had ups and downs. I was,
Mhm.
I was a paperbacks from hell era horror writer, and there were lulls for the horror genre after that. And I wrote some other things. I wrote some short stories, and eventually the Dusk Society graphic novel. But there were some downtimes. But I've always done something, and I've
Mhm.
always kept writing, and. It just somewhere in the mix, I built the discipline into my system, and
Mhm.
so I write every day. And a lot of times, and I do many things now. I've got a screenplay that's floating around that I wrote with a buddy of mine, and uh, when it's time to work on that, my we did the same thing. I did a
Right.
draft and then sent it to him. He did a draft, and we hammered it, until we got a pretty good script together.
Mhm.
But that just became what I worked on, before I did anything else. The hardest time was when I was in corporate marketing. I worked for a healthcare system, and so I was writing. My day job was writing about not news stories anymore, but was writing about disease and how to treat disease, and you should get screened for this and that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
that took more out of me than the newspaper work. It was a little bit harder to balance,
Right.
but I continued to do it. But the first, no, I've mentioned, kind of alluded to the harshness of it. I first. One of the first things that one of the first nights I was a full-time reporter. I was an intern for like 6 months, and then I became a general assignment reporter right out of college. So I was fortunate, got out of college, graduated one day, went to work at the newspaper full-time the next day, and probably the second night on a 1 to 10 shift, it was a very uh, just a terrible murder, and I was the only guy on, and
Right.
get the story, and cops were not ready to talk about it, and we had
Mhm.
to, and the real police reporter was home by then, so he's telling me, go look at the jail log. And so they had public record. I go
Mhm.
up to the jail. First time I'd ever done that, they buzzed me to send me through a metal detector, let me look at the log, and they got a first-degree murder on
Right.
there. And okay, they found somebody, so we knew we had to arrest. All of that, and you go through all that, and you get off at 10:30. Wow. So I guess just having the tenacity to say, I got to make a living, but I don't want to give up writing. That wired the discipline into me,
Mhm.
and so I wrote most of my pinnacle novels from midnight till 2 a.m. And that includes, for the plugs, Azarias, Night Brothers, Blood Hunter, Nelfs, and When Darkness Falls, all
Mhm.
still available on ebook from Crossroad Press. So wrote all those during that time. My shift changed a little bit, and I wrote my 3 young adult novels, Deadly Delivery, The Gift, and New
Mhm.
Year's Evil, As by Michael August. I wrote all of those. I was back working 8 to 5, which was that took an adjustment. I was a little harder working. Somehow you don't have as much. It seemed like I didn't have as much time when I got off at 5, because you had to get some sleep and be back at 8.
Right.
But I soldiered through that. And now I write early in the morning, and the last really 8 years I have been a creative writing teacher. And what I've always done is I did my writing first. And the earliest class I ever taught was 9 a.m. So I would do my writing before that, get up, get the coffee, and write until I had time to go somewhere or grade. And so I've spent 7 years at Full Sail University teaching horror, mystery, and suspense. So it was a great gig. And my wife took a job last year at William and Mary, so we moved from Orlando to Williamsburg, where I am now. And I am teaching online now for Southern New Hampshire University. And I'm teaching short story, which has a lot of genre writing into it, contemporary fiction, and I am approved to teach a genre class when it cycles around and they need an additional teacher on it. Adjunct these days.
Very cool. So we're coming close to the end of this. I got a few more questions for you. Cool. Now, the first one, before we even move on to any of those, is there anything you want to talk about or let anybody know what's going on? I mean, obviously we hit on Bloodline, so if you want to give them some more information on that.
Yeah, would love to have people be on the lookout for that, especially about July, that, if things go well. Bloodline and Friar Rush will probably be a doubleheader Kickstarter. I have been writing. Crossroad Press picked up my old books a couple of years ago, and I've written 2 new novels for them, Dark Hours. And that is actually an expansion of a short story I wrote for Cemetery Dance magazine a number of years back. Then that story was called The Exclusive. But very, very pleased with that. It's about a student reporter. And there really was a case where when I was in college, everybody feared that this murderer had escaped. There was a jailbreak, and there really was a jailbreak. About 10 guys got away from it was in Louisiana, it's the parish jail. 10 guys got away at one time, and one of them was a murderer. And everybody at my school feared that guy had come because he was a young guy, he could blend in, that he was on campus. So the premise of my novel, my student journalist believes that the killer is hiding out on campus, and then he contacts her and wants to tell his side of the story and offers her an exclusive and lures her, and she plans safeguards and things. She's not stupid. She plans safeguards around doing an interview with him, but it winds up being at the library. It winds up being after hours, and she winds up trapped in the library during the dark hours when the big lights are down. And this guy is actually planned a lot of puzzles and traps for her, and it's just a long, long night for my heroine, Allison Rose. So that is Dark Hours, an original book from Crossroad Press. And Crossroad has a series called the OCLT series, the Orphic Crisis Logistical Task Force, or Occult. And they have a team of investigators that, especially when giant monsters turn up, they are they're the ones that marshal the effort. I wrote, and different writers have contributed to it. I wrote a book called Disciples of the Serpent, which Crossroad calls a OCLT tie-in. Professor Bullfinch is one of the folklorists, is part of the OCLT team. And I invented Eileen O'Donnell, who is a special detective for the Irish Garda. And she is involved in a counterterrorism operation, actually, that goes wrong. And she gets bumped down in her mind to a sub rosa unit of the Garda, the Ashtec, which is devoted to investigating the paranormal. And when a series of scholars are killed, and the result is like a venom that nobody can recognize, she gets paired with Bullfinch to investigate this series of murders, and they realize that there's a lost language, and that what Patrick really drove out of Ireland is much worse than little snakes. And with a cult that's working to find the lost language and being able to open a doorway, and so it's a race across Ireland through all of these ruins to try to put a puzzle together and stop cultists and bad things from happening. And it's a rip-roaring adventure. And David Wilson, who is the publisher of Crossroad Press, is a Navy man, served in the Navy for many years. So a lot of the latter part of the story takes place on a Irish Coast Guard cutter. And with David's naval expertise, he was kind of like editor and technical advice on it. So lots of cool stuff. Very proud of that book. And Dark Hours and Disciples of the Serpent are brand newish titles from me, and can be found, Amazon, and doing the usual searches.
All right, cool. And just to let everybody know, I will have that information in the show notes. So if everybody, you can click on the links and go straight to Amazon and check out those books.
Yeah.
Now, I got a few goofy questions.
Sure.
I love okay, so well, because I'm a comic guy, I write prose. I've written prose. I write prose. Enjoy that sort of thing. But initially, it's comics. So it's always comics for me. So if you were given the golden ticket to write any character in any company, okay, Marvel or DC, right? Or if it's something like from 2000 AD or Dark Horse or one of these other companies, if you had your druthers, who or what team or book would you choose to write? And you could do anything you want.
Anything? Well, one thing that probably a couple of things, but one thing I loved as a kid was Legion of Superheroes, or Legion, I guess now.
Yeah.
I would love to do a Legion story, and tap into some of the team. They're showing up on Supergirl now, but that's not how it really happened. How it really happened was in the comics, and I would love to take some of the classics. Mon-El, of course, who is used heavily in Supergirl, but Lightning Lad was one of my favorites. I had longish hair, and I thought I kind of looked like Lightning Lad was Garth Rand's. And at that time, he had like a really tight cosmic suit, and he had drew his hair kind of long. And I kind of thought I looked like him. And so he was the one I like. I was younger than they were portraying them as when I was reading them heavily. But I would love to do something with Legion. I think Mike Grell's run on Legion was some of my, it goes back a while, but that was some of my favorite Legion times. So I would love a shot at that. And I would love to do something with Tarzan, maybe. Tarzan, a lot of people know Tarzan through the movies, but the comics have always been truer to the Burroughs, the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. And Tarzan was always finding lost civilizations and lost cities, and he would find, a medieval British castle jousting world in the middle of Africa, or Roman legions and things like that. And I would love to do something like that, do my own thing with some of the lost stuff. Now, and it has been adapted as a comic back in the the Joe Kubert day. I'm fortunate now through Silverline. We're working with a lot of, as they say, QBs, Kubert School graduates. But, I love the Joe Kubert Tarzans, and Korak and all back when I was a kid, and he adapted Tarzan and the Lion Man which is one where you got like a Frankenstein story and kind of a Planet of the Apes type story going in the jungle. And I would like to do something like that, and it probably had a little bit of Universal horror influence, and Burroughs was working in Hollywood. So there's a lookalike actor that playing a Tarzan-like character, and everybody thinks he's Tarzan or Tarzan's him and stuff. But I would love to do a Tarzan horror story. So, you say
that would be interesting.
The unlimited budget. I would love, if you gave me the ultimate unlimited budget, I would love to do like the Tarzan and the Lion Man movie and put Tarzan up against the mad scientist and all of that stuff. That would be, the people don't know. Many people don't know that the breadth of the Burroughs landscape, and I would love to tap into a little bit of that.
That's cool. All right, now I have a few other questions. Now this is more like a rapid fire. I'll mention two names or two things, and you'll pick the one you like.
Okay.
Maybe on one or two of them, I'll ask you why.
Okay.
So you're my guinea pig. This is the first time I'm doing this. I just want to see how this works out. So here we go. Robert E. Howard or Fritz Lieber? Wow.
I have a friend who is a big fan of Farfad and the Gray Mouser. So I'll say, and I like Conjure Wife. So I'll say Fritz Lieber.
Okay. H.P. Lovecraft or Poe?
Oh boy, that's a tough call. I wrote, and I should be plugging a couple of other things too.
Feel free. That's
I wrote. I love Lovecraft. Written a couple of Lovecraftian stories. In fact, in Disciples, if it's not apparent in the description, Disciples is a Lovecraftian story. But I love Lovecraft, but Poe was one of my formative influences too. And in 11th grade, I wound up writing some very Poe-like stories. And a couple of years ago, I wrote a story called A Cooler of Craft Brew, which is cask of Amontillado with Florida Man. And so Poe.
Gotcha. Okay. Godzilla or Gamera?
Godzilla, with the stipulation that, because I think they're gonna flip it in the next movie, but I like Godzilla as a good guy. So I want to do Godzilla, heroic Godzilla.
Okay. Captain America or Batman?
Oh man, that's another tough call too. And I think I said this on Silverline's show, but there was a used bookstore and somebody's Captain America collection had gotten turned in, traded in when I was a kid. And so I had a great stack of Captain America comics. And that was one of the great runs of things I had was Captain America and S.H.I.E.L.D. That was from a few years younger than I was reading. I was a little, it was from a couple of years back, but it had Captain America and Falcon and all that. So I'm going to say Captain America, even though I love Batman too. But I guess, I didn't say Batman earlier because everybody says Batman.
Right.
And there's cool stuff in Captain America. So Cap.
Okay. Clive Barker or Stephen King?
Another tough call. Just King, because big influence. I like Books of Blood, and I love The Damnation Game, but in general, King.
Gotcha. Okay. Kirby or Buscema? I don't know if that's a straight comic book question. I don't know if you.
And I'm going to Kirby just because. Roland Mann was saying, I think last night, he'd love to be able to see, even though it's inked and colored and everything, he'd love to be able to see the pencils, underline it. And I think there's no missing Jack Kirby, work. And there's, he did so much great stuff. I mean, all the Golden Age stuff, and then New Gods and Etrigan the Demon and all that. And So there's so much Kirby stuff, really, and so gotta go with the Godfather.
Okay, got you. Now here's the last one. Asimov or Heinlein?
Whew, another tough one, and
Mhm.
there's some great Heinlein stuff, but and I guess they all got some various bits of baggage with them. Asimov, because Asimov, in a lot of ways was kind of pure intellectual stories,
Right.
and I guess I'm at an age where I appreciate what he was doing, and there are a lot of more obscure things. Like the Black Widowers, which are like these, little mystery stories with a twist. The Union Club mysteries, which he wrote, a book full of them. Anyway, there's little You Solve It mysteries. And when I was a kid, he wrote some mystery stories about a boy whose father was a New York detective, and they were the same kind of things. They were like these mysteries that hinged on one twist. And he wrote those, many of them, for Boys Life magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So I, had early exposure to Asimov on that front, and I like Foundation and the robots and all that. So he by a nose, a little bit ahead of Heinlein.
Heinlein. Okay. All right. Sounds awesome. So Sidney, this was awesome, man. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And so, is there one last plug? Like, one last website?
Just sidisalive.com.
Mm-hmm.
Three words all together, sidisalive.com. And so I'd love everybody to come visit me there, and you can get to all my other social media from there. And I'm in all of the places. But I'll plug Cat Ladies of the Apocalypse, brand new collection by the great edited by the great Lynn Worthen of Camden Park Press. And I have a story in this called The Witch of Washington Park. All of these are post-apocalyptic stories, all different apocalypses, all featuring heroines with cats. Mine is a biologist trying to reinvent agriculture in a post-apocalyptic landscape and running afoul of cultists and everything else. Was released April 15th. Nobody knew it was going to drop in the middle of a pandemic, but post-apocalyptic stories featuring stalwart and brave grandmothers and powerful heroines with cats at their sides.
Right. All right. Awesome. So Sidney, thank you so much. Thank you, guys. And look, I'm looking to bring on more creators, more artists, more writers, so on and so forth. So please hit the like, hit subscribe, and please share out the video. Let everyone know that what's going on. All right. So take care and have a great night. JD out.
Bye now.